Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the May edition, the special Superbooth roundup of Molten Music Monthly. Yes, we've just had Superbooth, that most exciting of all synthesizer shows, almost as pivotal and exciting as Synth East that we had a couple of months ago. But yes, this is the place where everyone who has anything to do with synthesizers and modular synthesizers comes together in a crazy place in Berlin and has a fantastic 3 days of just awesome synthiness and social community glorious interaction. It really is quite a thing, but I would kind of like to start with an apology, because there are like 250 manufacturers there showing the best and most awesome stuff that their little minds can come up with, and I got to see about 3 of them, maybe 4, and that seems desperately unfair. And so I feel like I'm not really doing Superbooth right. I mean, I have a fantastic time. I go there for a day and I shake some hands and I hug some people and I go, yay! And I get dragged off to see a couple of things and go, oh, that's it. And then more sort of eating, drinking and going, hey! And which is brilliant and I have a lovely time. But unless you're one of those fortunate manufacturers who happens to catch the eye of Sonic State or Sound on Sound or Synthanatomy or someone of like that who can do a good bit of content on you, then you're perhaps not going to get the coverage that you were hoping for. And that's a shame. Now, I would like to put out a big shout out to people like Sonic State, Sound on Sound, Synthanatomy for all the glorious content they're doing. It's fantastic that we can sit back and view all of these things that were at the show. But they can't cover everybody, and I can't get round to see everybody, and I really wish that I could. And so when we do these roundups on Superbooth, you're only really getting the ones that we were able to stumble across. And there's probably loads more out there that we didn't get to see, or I didn't get to see, or I'm not aware of. And I think that's a shame. So if you're a modular manufacturer out there thinking, oh, nobody came to my desk and nobody filmed my stuff, then get in touch, let me know, tell me about your gear. Because I'm passionate about modular synthesis, any kind of synthesis, great ideas, something that will enable us to make more and groovier music, either easier or more complex or more simple, anything that feeds in to this crazy notion that we can push electrons around and make glorious sounds. Anything like that, let me know. Send me your details so that I can check it out. And if it's interesting, then heck, I'll include it in a future Molten Music Monthly. But for now, with all of that said, here are an enormous list of things that stood out from a much bigger enormous list of things for me. And I would try to get through these as quickly and as efficiently as I can so that this doesn't go on for hours and hours, in which case I should probably shut up and we'll get right on with it. So let's kick off with Gamechanger Audio Plasma Voice. Now, they've been kicking around bits of Plasma for ages. It's been in some sort of drive pedal, it's been in a drive Eurorack module from RYK Synths. This little tube of gloriously Van de Graaff generating kind of stuff going on. We can see it. It's visceral. It has an energy to it. Well, obviously it has an energy to it. It has electricity to it. And you kind of feel that in its usage, you feel that in its visual, that connection between the sparky generating of electrical charges, discharging, and stuff. And previously it's been used in a distortive way. So you stick stuff into it and it crackles and it comes out the other end sort of crushed and bleeding, I think. But this time around what they're trying to do is extract some form of oscillation from it. Because more than anything, Gamechanger Audio want to produce a bit of melody. I want to produce sort of percussive sounds as well as potentially melodic sounds from this thing. So they had it there on the show. They had a couple of big clips on it. They make it look like it was powered by a car battery, but I don't believe a word of it. I think they just saw I'm pointing upwards at my at the thing that arm that I've put Eurorack modules on. They were just trying to copy that. That's all they were doing. So they had this thing, the Plasma Voice. They'd built a load of algorithms which fuss with it and mess with it about to try to achieve some kind of repeatable, replicatable sound. and it was doing all right. I mean, the individual one, they had some buttons that sort of triggered it, and it went kind of as you imagine a plasma tube would go. But then they also had a few in a rack, they were kind of teasing out some kind of bass line. There was definitely something working in there. So I think there's potential in this module. It's not finished, but I mean, you can't beat that visual. That plasma tube plasmaing around the place, that's just extraordinary. So if they could pull out something manageable, something usable, then I think that's going to be very exciting. Talking of which, the Jets are in town. That's just going to make this so much easier. Or indeed now, it's for the chickens to go crazy next door, and we'll have a show. The Jam Sandwich is the brilliantly named 4x4 grid sequencer from Electro Jam. 4x4, it had a whole load of output, so it's sort of multiple channels of stuff going on with these wonderfully light up knobs. In fact, I think they were the small knobs, the small light up knobs like you had on the CV Civilization thing by Hui. Do you know what I'm talking about? And they've put proper knobs over the top so that the light comes through. Also looks a lot like the analog Solutions sequencer. By the by, this is a 4x4 sequencer. It was designed by a chap who found himself in a situation where his eyesight was failing. He was using other boxes like Electron boxes, but could no longer see the displays when trying to use them, or particularly in live performance. And so he moved to Eurorack because it's more of a touchy-feely kind of environment. But even there, sequencers in particular became a bit of a struggle because they tend to have displays and other bits and pieces going on. So he decided to build his own. And this is what we've got. It's a nicely laid out, nice and wide 4x4 grid with illuminated everything. And rather than little tiny bits of writing, it's got big icons next to things to tell you what's going on. It also has a big sort of LED meter, I suppose you could call it, which shows you how far you've turned something, because ultimately these are encoders, I think. And so you're getting a big visual display. So everything about it is trying to help people who are visually impaired. But perhaps the pièce de résistance in there is that it also has an audio output for audio description. So every time you touch something, move something, click something, it's describing that to you. It's narrating the whole event, which is partly awesome, partly hilarious, I suppose, depending on which way you look at it. But then that's from I have no idea what it's like to struggle with your eyesight in that way. And so, you know, I absolutely do not mean to make light of it in any way. But hey, a bit of laughter's no bad thing. But it was literally going, knob on, knob off, turn to max. And it would tell you what it is. I mean, it's totally brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I mean, I applaud anything which increases accessibility to this sort of stuff. And he's right, Eurorack is great for feeling your way through things without actually having to see. But as you know, something I've also explored when moving from software to hardware is that lack of visual feedback. And software, of course, can tell you what's going on all the time. So it's interesting to bring that into hardware, because hardware is where the fingers really feel more at home. But it's the software which tends to provide the accessibility to things. So putting those two things together, I thought was really, really interesting. And it's not a bad sequencer either. There was lots of stuff going on. It was running all sorts of channels. There was something like 16 outputs, which I couldn't quite see where they were, but something along those lines. But anyway, it was a fascinating and very awesome thing to bring along to Superbooth. This was not a new idea, but it was in a new version. This is the Timetosser from Alta Audio. Timetosser is an hilarious desktop currently device, which has got a row of 8 buttons, I think, into which flows your audio, and it allows you to remix it in real time. So it's like your audio has been constantly sampled and split across 8 slices, so you could sort of remix as you go. So as it goes through, you can capture that first beat and keep hitting that beat, or resequence it, or reverse it, and do other bits and pieces. It's very fun, it's very clever at what it does, and it takes quite a bit of courage to actually use it in live performance, because you feel like a bit like a teenage DJ doing cutting and slicing. But that does not take away from the fact that it's an enormous amount of fun and very, very effective. Anyway, they've decided to give that a go in Eurorack. And that brings out a whole load of other possibilities, because not only could you run audio through it and resequence it, redo it, create ratchets and pauses and tape stops and all those sorts of things, but you could potentially do that with control voltage. And that means you can have modulation going to something which you then rework, because different modulation, or a sequence going through that you rework into a different sequence, if you see what I mean. So it has a lot of potential extra things it could do in modular, which it doesn't necessarily do on the desktop audio in and out kind of place, if you get me. So I thought that was very exciting and it's a joyous thing. It just brings you joy to play with, and that's a good thing to have in Eurorack at any time. The Black Noise Modular Cosmos. Now, this is a weird one because a lot of people said to me, oh, this is great, you should go and check this out. Look at this is brilliant. They send me a picture of it or a link to the site, and I'd look at it and go, what is it? It's just a field of, literally just a load of patch sockets. What's that about? So, oh no, it's brilliantly intuitive, right? Intuitive in what way? I mean, it has no labels. It just has a couple of, I don't know, it has a couple of icons on it, and that's it. In what way is this possibly intuitive? In what way am I supposed to know what on earth it does? So I'm just going to put this out there to say the Black Noise Modular Cosmos is it's a curious module. Apparently, get this, it can be used as a VCO, an LFO, a ring mod, a polarizer, a VCA, an LPG, a phased lock loop, a phase modulator, a minimum maximum logic gate wave shaper, a complex gate generator, fuzz distortion gate extractor, trigger, extractor gate generator, voltage generator, trig generator, half rectifier, full rectifier, inverter, buffer multiple, mixer, difference compressor, sidechain compressor, VC clipper, VC switch, clock, doubler, envelope follower, and more. What? I said to the guy at Black Noise Modular, you're going to need to explain this because I don't know what you're talking about. How can it be all these things, and how do you even start making it be any of those things? So, you know, with a bit of luck, I think some explanation videos will be along. The Gliss from Bela. I've been looking at this for a little while because they got in touch a fair while ago saying, hey, we're doing this thing and we think you'll like it. And they're right. I do like it very much. Now, what it immediately reminds me of is the Sound Machines LS1, which I keep saying whenever I talk about this, which is a shame because it takes a little bit away from what the Gliss is trying to do. It's flipping Ukrainian pilots, isn't it? That's what it is. They're all getting trained up over my head. Possibly. Anyway, so the LS1, as you probably know, is a strip, a touch strip. You go up and down and it gives voltage, and you can record a little bit of up and downage to create sort of a looped piece of modulation. It's great, it's useful, you can use it for playing tunes, you can just use it for controlling stuff, great for live performance. Gliss is that, but evolved into a much groovier, much bigger idea. Well, kind of. As in, it's got a whole bunch of modes. So you can do the same thing, you can move your finger up and down and record that, but you can record up to a minute. Now, a minute is like automation rather than modulation, if you get what I mean. So you've got acres of space in which to create this pathway of modulation through things. But it's also not just the up and down, it's also pressure. So as you press your finger down, your finger sort of splats wider, and that creates another control voltage output. So you've got movement like that, and then you've got squishiness as well as gate going on. Inside behind it, it's got these LEDs which move about, or maybe the LEDs don't move actually, they change to another, but you know what I mean. It's got a moving light underneath of different colours that show what different modes it's in. So that will follow you around. So it's brilliantly visual, which is what the LS1 never really was. So it can see exactly what's going on. But then you can do other things, like you can split it into two and have two going in different directions. And then you've got one using the modulation output, one using the pressure output. Or you can set it up as a mini keyboard, say like 5 steps, and then from that press different notes or different levels of modulation coming out. There's a whole load of stuff going on. They're the only ones that I can remember, but it was visually brilliant, which is something that I like, as you know from my Molten motion meter. It does have a similar vibe to being able to visualize what it is that's going on, but this is an actual generator and controller of stuff. So great, it's a great upgrade to the LS1. I think it's fantastic. And as I understand it, Bela are still sort of fussing around and finalising the firmware before they're completely happy with it, but I very much hope they'll get hold of one and able to show you exactly what it does. The Crosspatch Triggerpad was a new one, dynamic trigger sequencer. interesting idea. Quite like it. You've got a module with a bunch of patch sockets on it and a USB port. Now with that USB port you plug in a launch pad. You know, launch pad, an Ovation launch pad or something similar. We've all got one of those knocking about, so we must have all picked one up at some point, and it's gathering dust somewhere when, you know, from the last time you performed with Ableton Live, which you can't remember when that was because we've all now moved on to fabulous bits of hardware. So you could dig out your launch pad, sit that down, plug it into this module, and then you can use that 8x8 grid to program beats, to program patterns, trigger patterns, and all that sort of stuff. So the whole interface becomes this extra piece of thing that you plug into the module. So the module by itself is really just an output device. It's taking all of this, storing it inside itself, I think, and then outputting that to different outputs to run different percussion and other bits and pieces. I think it's a pretty groovy idea, and that it sort of repurposes pieces of hardware that you might already have, although I should point out that it's only from the Mark II Launchpad upwards, which counts me out because mine's the original yellow and green thing. So, you know, sadly I'm a little bit upset about that, because it would be great to be able to use them all the way back, but hey, you've got to be able to use what works, and that looks like a great little idea. Lambda Synthetics PolyPulse. We had glimpses of this early on in the show and it just looked weird. It has a weird look about it. It's got like these 5 dark windows onto this otherwise retro keyboard style interface. You go, what are those windows about? Are they displays or something? What is it? Does it light up? No, the 5 black windows are actually XY pads. So essentially this is it some kind of groove box? I think it is. Some kind of sequencing groove box sort of thing. Oh, that's right. It uses digital FM, additive synthesis and sampling. So I think you've got 5 things. So each of those XY pads represents one of the 5 channels, and those 5 channels could be whatever you like. So it could be a drum kit, a sample drum kit, it could be a digital FM voice, it can be an additive synthesis thing, or you can just sample the heck of stuff and put that in. Everyone's trying to do sample-based stuff, and it seems to all be very rudimentary at the moment. It's like we've gone back in time to the early days of sampling. Everything does something very basic, and that's okay. Maybe we should be celebrating that. I'm just always expecting something grander when we come to the sample side of things, rather than just waveform playback. But hey, what am I talking about? I have no idea. Anyway, the PolyPulse is based, they talked a lot about algorithms, they talked a lot about polyrhythms and how that was important, but overall you just got the sense that it was a 5-channel groove box with its own synthesis and sampling engine inside, which looked kind of fun, with a lot of hands-on. Everything was out on the front, which I quite liked. I liked the clackety keyboard thing and the fact you could modulate different things all at once. You had all 5 channels available to you at all times. I thought that was rather groovy, but I'm not convinced that the demos of it really gave it its full justice yet. So it's probably one we're going to see blossom in the not too distant future. The Elta Music Solar 42. Now this is one magnificent machine. This is probably what I would say is the most interesting, awesome thing I saw at the show, although sadly I didn't see it. I didn't get the chance to go around and see this one, but I have seen it. I have seen content on it, so I have an idea about it. Now, Elta Music make some interesting stuff, and they made the Solar 50, which is a 50 oscillator drone machine, where you had like 10 sections with 5 oscillators that you set up as drones, and you just drone the heck out of things. And that was interesting, I think. But at the end of the day, it's drones, and that's not the most exciting thing to play with. I don't think. You probably spend all your time just tuning, all the time, just tuning. So they've had a little bit of a rethink, and they've come back with a Solar 42. Now, does that have 42 oscillators? That's a little bit unclear. Let's assume that it does, but it only has 6 lots of 5 drone oscillators. So that's 30 oscillators to start with, I think. So on this big thing, you've got 1, 2, 3 on either side. So that gives you 6 banks of 5. So that's your drone thing taken care of. But then in the middle, it has this. It has more of a synthesizer voice going on. So they've brought in melodic elements, and that's very much what you hear when you hear it playing in action. So I imagine you've got these quite large multi-oscillator voices, melodic voices, which you can add in and morph through along with the sort of the background, the underbelly of droning. It's got some effects built in, it's got a lot of panning and interesting movement and shape and a pair of filters to play with and get stuck into, and it definitely is capable of producing this amazingly cinematic, sumptuous soundscape. It's just soundscapes of gloriousness is what it is. I would really like to get my hands on one of these. It looks like a lot of fun to play with, and the sort of thing that you could just have that and you would have a marvellous time just exploring the ends of the sonic universe. This is not rocket science. Bopp and Steve. Curious name, curious module, I would say. This is like a deconstructed reverb. If you get a reverb, you've got all these elements in it, like pre-delay, density, time, tail, all those sorts of things. And what they appear to have done in this crazy module is pull those individual things out to allow you to affect them differently and essentially mess the heck out of them. So it's a deep and interesting spacey cosmic reverb, but one where you can play with the delay by itself, play with the density by itself, play with the tail end by itself, but also pitch shift through it or in it or past it or something, so you can create choral harmonies which you can place at any point within that signal chain of delay, density, whatever the other bits are. You can stick it in at any point. So you can either have it repeating or you can have that chorusing at the end on top of the repeats. Very interesting. There's a lot of things to explore within it, I think, and I'm not doing it any justice. But it's very interesting to know. I was talking to Stein about it, and he said that the White Rabbit, which I have here, is kind of an approximation of it. It's like a scaled down version of it. And that's quite exciting because the White Rabbit is really fun to play with. So I'm looking forward to the Bopp and Steve and what that could possibly offer. It's a ridiculously wide module, is all I'm thinking. And that can sometimes be a worry, particularly when it's this brightly coloured. It's going to dominate your rack very, very, very quickly. But that's an exciting thing. Anything from This Is Not Rocket Science tends to be an exciting part of your rack. And so I embrace it. I embrace the yellow and strange greens and odd patterns. I think that could be awesome. But it looks like a fun thing, and it sounded brilliant. You had Priscilla singing through it as well, which created this enormously interesting sound. So yeah, definitely looking forward to trying that one out. Right, this feels like a very important one that's in danger of perhaps getting lost in the masses of Eurorack stuff we have to think about. And that's the Tiptop Audio ART. Now, this had me scratching my chin, scratching my head, wondering what is this actually about? Because the announcement came in, the idea is that this is a whole new signal for Eurorack. What? Why would we need a new signal? I mean, we've got control voltage, which we've rescued from being lost in the past. And we've got MIDI, which keeps trying to creep in that we don't know that we really want. But, you know, a whole nother signal. What is it that we can't do? So this is sort of about polyphony. It's about other things too, but perhaps the focus, the where this comes from, is really polyphony. And the idea is that Tiptop Audio have created this new signal to control polyphonic modules, and it creates a new thing to be patched, and it also creates a new cable. So what is it all about? Well, I've been digging away at it, struggling away, trying to work out, no, but what actually is it? Yeah, but yeah, you know, go, oh, what it's great is for connecting this to this, and then this happens. You go, yeah, but what actually is it? Because what they appear to be saying is that you've got this new cable called ART, and I plug this cable into another oscillator, and it plays it like you would with 1 volt per octave. But it's not that. This is sending instructions, so it's digital, right? It's sending instructions, even though it's using a standard patch cable, it's still digital. It's still sending dots and dashes. It's essentially Morse code down this cable to tell the oscillator what to do. So in the oscillator, you need an ART compatible oscillator, and that's going to have a control board in it, and you need an ART compatible generator, sequencer, or something which also has the board in, and it's those two things that are talking to each other. Instructions are going from one to the other. Is it bi-directional? I don't know. I don't think so. It might be. No, it's still a little bit hazy out there exactly what's going on. But that's the essence of it. The ART cable is a digital connection between these two modules. Now, what's important and why this isn't MIDI is probably mostly to do with resolution. And that makes you think, well, what about MIDI 2.0? It's just around the corner. Anyway, let's just put that aside and just focus on what we're trying to understand here. So they've got two ideas is what they're putting forward. They're putting forward the idea of discrete polyphony. Discrete polyphony is where you have one oscillator and then another one, and then another one, and another one where you create polyphony that way. Now, when we do that in Eurorack, we end up with a whole forest of cables going down to there from the oscillators, then into the filters, then into so on and so forth. And then you run into problems with tuning and trying to keep it all together. And what ART is going to do, one of the things, is try to keep all that together. So it does the tuning side of things for you. So essentially, you're talking about sort of digitally controlled oscillators, which is what keeps all the tuning together. So this ART connection is doing that. And with discrete polyphony, you've got a whole bunch of oscillators, and it will keep all of that together and work brilliantly. That's the idea. All right, I mean, that's interesting in of itself. But then they say, well, how about we have polyphonic modules? So they've released a range of polyphonic modules. Now, that's okay also, but then you've got to route a whole bunch of cables from one to the other to make that polyphony flow, to make that signal flow. So Tiptop Audio going, right, what we're going to do with that is we're going to send that down a different sort of cable, a polyphonic cable. We're going to call it PolyTips, and it's essentially based on USB-C, and it's a cable you just go out of the oscillator, multi-channel polyphonic oscillator into your polyphonic filter, into your polyphonic VCA, just with the one cable. And that's simple. There you go. That's all sorted. Yeah. All right then. And so you get this much more cable reduced and compact polyphonic synthesizer within your Eurorack. Okay. But then you've still got this ART cable, which is controlling the polyphonic oscillator. So not only can this single ART cable run a single oscillator with its run of instructions, it could also actually control a polyphonic oscillator with the same instruction set. So down this little cable, you're getting all sorts of instructions. You're getting entire chords or entire different notes on and off and that kind of thing. And all of that is being run into a polyphonic oscillator. And that's interesting. This ART cable is essentially a serial port. It's like RS-232. It's a serial communication port like you used to plug your mouse into many years ago, UART as it's called. Universal Asynchronous Receive Transmit, I think. Something along those lines. Is that important? I don't know. It's just, I have this desire to get to the bottom of exactly what's going on because I don't know that I trust this new signal. It feels like a digital step too far. It feels like MIDI, but perhaps, slightly enhanced MIDI. But then why can't I do it with MIDI already? Or as I say, MIDI 2. So I don't know. I'm still picking away at it to try to work out, is this actually what we want? Because what I feel is that what Tiptop are trying to do is to make polyphony in Eurorack simpler and easier and more engaged and easier to save, to patch save, to connect to your computer, to have all of those things running really nicely. And I think that's not what modular is about. Modular is not about running nicely. It's not. It's about overcoming. It's about struggling with the difficulties, struggling with the inconsistencies. And I don't really mean struggling. I mean, that's part of the process of creating something, is that you're tuning stuff in. You're accidentally finding that you're enjoying FM because you didn't tune your things correctly. Or you're discovering other pathways because you're plugging a lot of stuff in and out again. If you reduce that, you're reducing the opportunity for those accidents to happen and for those adventures to be taken. So while I don't mind the idea of tuning within Eurorack being a good and easy thing, that's fine. How long is it going to be before they have to introduce sort of a vintage anti-tuning function to make them all go slightly out of tune? Because that's actually what we like. We don't like the precision. We don't like things to stay all in tune. That's what regular synthesizers do. And regular synthesizers are forever adding extra features to give you that authentic feel by making it not work quite right. So I think the last thing we need is something that makes it all work right. What's the point of that? I know. He agrees. He agrees. So ultimately, it's this is going to live and die on whether other manufacturers adopt it and whether the people, us users, actually like it and appreciate it. Is that going to be something that we want in our systems? Because it's brilliantly put together, brilliantly displayed, beautiful modules. Tiptop do a great job. It's going to be cost-effective way of getting polyphony into your system. But ultimately, I just feel just buy a synth, man. I mean, if polyphony is a real struggle for you, just buy a synth. It's all there. Particularly if you're taking away patching opportunities and making it more proprietary, then, just buy a synth. But we shall see. It's fascinating. I'm keeping my eye on it. I'll be interested in giving it a go and trying to demonstrate what that's all about at some point. That would be fascinating. But at this point, I don't know if I'm entirely ideologically opposed or not. But I have a certain amount of skepticism about it. Talking of polyphony, we also had the telepathy from Dreadbox. I said it. I did. Telepathy. What is it? It's a single synth voice in a module, so quite crammed in there. It's a small module with only a few controls on side, but it has absolutely an entire synthesizer voice inside, including oscillators, filters, envelopes, VCAs, the lot. But Dreadbox seem to have plans for this little thing, in that it can run by itself. Sure, it can run by itself, but what they'd want you to do is put a whole bunch together in a row and use it with polyphony in a polyphonic kind of way. So this is, if you like, another way of looking at polyphony, but within the confines of what we already know and already do and already use. That's interesting. It does bring in MIDI. That's its concession, I suppose, to making this work properly. So what you can do is you take one module, which is, I think, like the master module or something, and then you loop in a whole bunch of others via little MIDI cables, little just patch cable, MIDI out to MIDI in, MIDI out to MIDI in. You do all of that, and then you can assign all the sliders on the front to all sorts of different parameters. You can either make them run the whole synth or make them run the individual parts of it. So you can have like individual oscillators doing their own thing, or you can have them all chained together and used together in a kind of a polychain sort of way. So interesting. I haven't got fully into exactly how it works or how you connect it up, or how do you get feedback back up the chain? How do you do that? Can you use this last one to control? I don't really know exactly how that all functions, but it was an interesting idea. And they also had this polyphonic effects processor at the end that sort of brought them all together. Because ultimately you're going to get lots and lots of audio out. And are you going to have to patch all that together into some other form of mixer to bring those together? I'm suspecting that you are. So in some ways the Dreadbox things epitomizes the difficulty you have with polyphony and having to have loads and loads of cables and things going on and having to be really clever about it. But it also brings in a level of cleverness that doesn't require you to throw out the whole idea of what modular is about. A bit more like the Dofer polyphonic modules do, and other people who've given that a go. So this is more of a hybrid MIDI audio analog digital thing going on, which is interesting. Again, needs a bit more explanation. And again, really, if we're going to do polyphony in Eurorack, why not buy a Nymphos? Because ultimately polyphony takes up a lot of space. It will take up rows and rows of things, and there are just easier ways to do polyphony, I think. Even when it comes down to perhaps simpler modules like the Polycinematic or the Oxycoral, things like that provide polyphony or provide entire synthesizers in a little module. I don't know, it's an interesting time. I think there's a lot of attempts to push at this polyphonic idea within Eurorack. Similarly with MIDI coming in, Tiptop with their bits and pieces, there's a change coming. Or at least there's a number of people who are pushing at the edges of what modular is about to try to either normalize it with other stuff to make it easier to play, or perhaps to make it like other synthesizers. And I'm not always sure. I'm not completely sure, as you can probably tell, that that's the way forward. It's not that I'm not into change. I'm into cool things, and whatever it is that comes along, if it's cool, that is interesting, then that's awesome. But I don't want change for change's sake. if something already exists which can do this job better in another way. You know, Eurorack is awesome at what it does. Does it need to do what some other synths do? I don't know. Still thinking. Crikey, we've still got a long way to go. Okay, next up with the Superlative Monolab. This is a beautiful looking, beautifully designed semi-modular synthesizer in just a nice, it's like Teenage Engineering, but like the POM 400 in Teenage Engineering, but slightly better, I would say. Slightly better design, nicer design, more sympathetic somehow, gorgeous, and definitely very, very inviting. So Superlative do a great job on that sort of thing. They also designed the SB01 Sound B, which was a take on the SH101 a few years ago now. And I think it should be noted, really, because it's a, you know, one wants to be diplomatic about these things, but 4 years ago they put the SB01 onto Kickstarter and successfully funded it massively. Everybody loved this thing, and the weird thing about it was that it was released at the time when the MS-101, the Behringer one, was also just about to pop onto the scene. And I kind of assumed, because the SB1 seemed to disappear, it's not been mentioned for the last 3 years, I just assumed that they'd decided not to do it because, heck, I mean, theirs was going to be very expensive compared to a 200 quid Behringer one, which essentially would sound the same. Wouldn't look as nice, no doubt, but essentially would sound pretty much the same. But no, what had happened is that they were successful on Kickstarter, and then it just went completely quiet. And sadly, no one has received their SB01 as yet, many years later. Now, there's a lot of stuff on the Kickstarter campaign in the updates, where your man from Superlative has been given a whole list of reasons why they have not yet quite produced it. And of course, you've got COVID in there, you've got the chip shortage, he's had some personal difficulties, lots and lots of different reasons as to why it hasn't come out. But there are understandably quite a few people out there who are pretty narked at the whole idea, because he's had people's money for a long, long time and not been able to deliver anything. So I just needed to get that out there so that I'm not ignoring that, because I think it's a little bit bad form to be showing a brand new product without having completed his obligations to the previous product. You know, if you're going to stick something on Kickstarter, you've got to come through before you do another one. I think that's good form. So this seems a little bit, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth that I'm not 100% convinced that you're on the level, mate. But he assures everyone and anyone who asked him that the SB01 will be out this year by November, and this will be around the same time. Don't know if it's going to go on Kickstarter, don't know if he's just going to release it. Who knows at this point. But I would just say to Mr. Superlative, is just, get it done. Get it done before you try to gather money and attention on a new product, I would say. Now, the RYK Modular Night Rider is an extraordinary looking module. I'm not actually sure that they were there. Well, I know that Jake was there because I spoke to him. But whether they had a booth or not, who knows? Who cares? Anyway, they put this out on Instagram at around the time of Superbooth, so I picked it up and thought, wow, this looks great. What is it? It's some kind of sequential resonator. It's just a bunch of LEDs going like this, and it just looks brilliant, so you've got to have it, really. But I know from personal experience that RYK do awesome modules, whatever they are. I mean, the complicated vector synth is fantastic for all of the crazy FM and additive synthesis stuff that it does. The M185 sequencer is just fantastic. Anyway, this is similarly stunning looking, and it's just a whole bunch of bandpass filters, I think, in there with which you can sequence and modulate and do crazy things with. And that's probably enough to say about that one. Noise Engineering had a new module in their Legio range called the Roucha. Roucha. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, what it is, it's actually their first dedicated, properly, for no other reason, filter. They've had filters in other things, but Noise Engineering have never actually done a standalone, this is what it is filter. And this is what it is. And the great thing is that it's also compatible with all the other Legio firmware, so it can be other things too, and other Legio things can also be this. It's part of what they do. It's a bit confusing, to be honest, but ultimately what it means, if you buy a module from Noise Engineering these days, it's bound to be able to do 5 other things as well. But is there anything special about this? Well, it's a 12 dB per octave stereo multi-mode filter. It also has wavefolding, because of course it does. This is noise engineering. And something very interesting, which is a gateable bypass. Bypass, see? Not something that really exists in Eurorack. That's interesting. So what essentially what that means is you can turn the bloody thing on and off. You don't have to be going through it all the time. You can just turn it on when you need it with a gate signal. Fantastic, I like that. PWM were there with a new synthesizer, an almost sort of finished synthesizer called the Mantis. Now this was designed with Chris Huggett, who is the guy behind the Wasp and the Gnat and the Spider sequencer from many years ago, and he recently passed away, which is very sad. But this was the synthesizer he was working on with PWM at the time of his death, and now it is coming forth into fruition. And it's quite exciting. It's probably what you could see as a Wasp Oscar hybrid, because Chris Huggett was also involved in the design of the Oscar. And it's all of that experience. I went through all the stuff by Novation and other bits and pieces that have been brought to bear upon this hybrid, digitally controlled oscillator, analog filter type instrument. There's a couple of things to note, I think, about it, because it wasn't completely finished, and so it's difficult to really comment on the sound. But it had this... What I like about it is it's all knobs out the front. There's no display, and it's got this button system for presets, like in the old days, which I quite enjoy. So I think there's a lot to play with within this synthesizer. It can be duophonic, I believe, is the idea, and you can offset the oscillators to play different notes and bits and pieces. And then it has two filters, so you can go through either in series or in parallel. So it kind of sounded like a good, fat, expanded sort of synthesizer, the kind of thing that we are very much going to enjoy. I mean, the only thing for me, I mean, PWM have definitely gone for a very distinctive aesthetic style. And when you think of the Wasp or you think of the Oscar, you think of something that looks absolutely extraordinary. And this is not really fulfilling that side of things. It's very straightforward, it's very evenly laid out, it's got this quite alarming green alongside the grey. It doesn't quite, I think, have the stylish aesthetic as something as bizarre as the Oscar or as stunning as the Wasp. But I think without a doubt the sound is going to be there, and it's going to be really interesting to give it a go once it's ready to play. Erica Synths were there with a whole new thing again. Lovely desktop unit called the Steampipe. Now, Steampipe for me goes bing. Reactor Steampipe was a synth for Reactor from many versions ago, which was essentially physical modelling, which is what this is. I wonder if that's related. Doesn't really matter. The idea of this is that it sort of models the physicality of playing a wind instrument. So it has like a blow feature, a resonating feature, and then the resulting sort of sound and tail end of that. So you control noise, a noise oscillator which is shaping the embouchure of a flute or a recorder through itself, and then you've got the resonating tube, and you have control over that. So it's physical modelling in hardware form, which is interesting. It's covered in knobs and different things you can change. I wonder whether the sound palette of it is actually going to be quite, on the quite narrow side. But who's to say? They've also designed it with wind controllers in mind, so you can plug in a MIDI wind controller and play it that way, which is interesting. So yeah, an interesting, different thing from Erica Synths. They did also have a couple of modules, one or rather two of which are seemingly identical with different engines. They've got a reverb and a delay. And Erica have said that they really like to produce modules that are focused on one thing. So rather than doing a multi-effects something or other, they would much rather do a single effect that gives you all the control over that thing. It's just slightly weird that they look identical. So you wonder whether the firmwares are going to be exchangeable or whether other ones will come out in the similar line, because that's often what happens when you look at people like noise engineering and such like. So there's been no mention of that on the website as yet. So it'll be an interesting thing to find out, because that would make it potentially more fantastic and also expandable down the line, perhaps, which will be interesting. The Make Noise Spectraphon was, of course, the talk of the show. It's this fabulous thing that does fabulous things when fabulousness goes into fabulousness and hippie stuff comes out the other side, and then there's this gloriousness that comes through the awesomeness of this, and it's sort of smeared across a veneer of fantasticness and boom. And there you go. Right on cue. That is what you get. What is this? Oh, who knows? Who knows what this is? Something to do with spectrums and adding things, stealing things, taking things, then using those as other things. It's fantastic. No one's ever thought of it before, and Make Noise are going to give it to you for you to get lost in forever on a huge chunk of your Eurorack. Why am I like this? Oh, I don't know. They just somehow rub me up the wrong way. And I don't mean it, because they're beautiful people and they're lovely and they make wonderful, wonderful modules. It's just they're mostly unintelligible all the time. All of it is just difficult. They won't call something what it is. They have to call it some other thing. So that you're spending your whole time completely baffled by what any of it is. And like when the press release came out, it's like, what? What does it even mean? Just heavens. I mean, for instance, I'll read you a bit. So the Spectraphon has two nearly identical sides, side A, side B, and they oscillate in one of two ways. They either oscillate in a spectral amplitude modulation way or in a spectral array oscillation. In spectral amplitude modulation, instead of oscillating at times like an analog VCO, the sound in the Spectraphon's input is used to modulate the amplitude of a set of harmonics. In spectral amplitude modulation, the Spectraphon can be sequenced and frequently modulated like any VCO, and at any time the current spectrum can be used to create an array for later, for use in spectral array oscillation mode, where the Spectraphon oscillates at all times, with the spectrum at the odd and even harmonics being drawn from those stored arrays. What? So, what? Again? Oh, I don't know. So, I mean, having a look at the demos and stuff, it's kind of a bit like a vocoder. That's what it feels like. You analyze audio, so you're kind of taking a quantized view of spectrum analysis and taking that to give you this vocodery comb-like effect, and you're either using that as a sound source or you're using the spectra analyzed from that is another in the other sound source. I don't know. It sounds a bit like a vocoder, which you then squeak about the place. I mean, I have to say that vocoding is my least favourite of all things that you can do with electronic sound. It does not appeal to me. No, in any way, shape or form. I mean, lots of people have got very excited by the fact there's Orange Vocoder 3 is out. And it's like, I hated it in version 1. I mean, version 3 is just 3 more levels of awfulness. Anyway, so the Spectraphon from Make Noise, people are going to love it. They're going to go crazy for it. I know plenty of really good, decent people who have heads on their shoulders and are normal who are going to love this sort of thing. It's a sort of playground of harmonic and spectral awesomeness. But, yeah, not for me. Bastl from Bastl Instruments. This is very cool. Very cool, partly because they make some of the best little promotional videos about stuff. Excellent. What does it do? Oh, there's a bit of a space delay. It's built into the same form factor as the Pizza. Now, the Pizza was their gloriously cool FM type complex oscillator in an oscillator sort of thing, which is great. I have a lot of time playing with that. And into the same form, they've now built this Bastl, which is a delay. Similar idea, lots of hands-on control, lots of different levels of opportunity within it to modulate and to change things and control things. And of course, you can load the Pizza into it as well, or the Bastl into the Pizza, whichever way you like. So yeah, super cool little module. I love the way it sits nicely in this sort of range of stuff they've got at the moment with the crazy VCA thing I've got over here, the Aikido, which I still don't quite understand, and the Pizza, and now the Bastl. Of course, Bastl being something that you would drop a Bastl leaf on top of a Pizza. See, I like that. That's quite good. I like the synergy of that, and that is something that that's a coolness. That's a level of Make Noise unintelligibility that is somehow friendly and cuddly and quirky and enjoyable. That just brings me into places that the Make Noise language does not. The Befaco were there. They had their new FX Boy. They also had a 7U case. This fella here. And of course, a 1U Molten motion meter, which I've got here. I'm going to be building the DIY one of those this week, so that's going to be ready for release in about 2 weeks, I think, from now. Something like the 6th of June. I think we're releasing officially, so I'm going to have everything ready for that, so that's very exciting. But I'm not going to go into that at the moment. But the case is brilliant, 7U case. I've got it stuck here on this movable monitor arm, which just it takes it to a whole other level, and I mean that as a pun, I suppose. It is fantastic. It does, of course, it wobbles. People keep saying, "Well, does it wobble?" Yeah, it's on a flipping arm. Of course, it wobbles, but that's not an issue. You know, you just plug things in, and that's okay. And it also depends on how much you tighten up your monitor stand once you know exactly where you want it to be. But the advantage personally for me is that I can sit over there and then stand up and walk over here, and this can be at the level where I can work on it. I'm not having to either bend down or look down or examine something or sit down and look up. I can exactly place it where I want it to be and work on it. It's just brilliant. And for some reason, I'm really loving the lack of border. I mean, I've always been into wooden edges on things. I like wooden edges on things. And suddenly without them, I'm going, wow, no, this is really nice too. So I'm quite surprising myself that I like the minimalistness of it. It's also the first time I've properly got a 1U row, because it's 7U, very much like the IntelliGel palette case. Not the palette case, the performance case. And similarly, it has IntelliGel compatible stuff inside to give you all these inputs and outputs at the back, including MIDI. So interesting, very, very interesting. It's a fantastic thing. It's radically overhauled my working space here, which I love, and has prompted me to flip in tidy, and the place looks great. And it's all down to this fella. The other thing they had is the FX Boy. This is a crazy madcap idea, where you have a module which is essentially the engine for an effects processor, but the effect itself comes on a cartridge, a Game Boy cartridge, of all things. I mean, do you buy blanks of those? Are those I don't really know. I haven't got down to the details, but they've got a whole bunch of different manufacturers to create effects that go on a cartridge. You plug the cartridge in the front, and you can pull them in and out, hot swap them, in fact, to give you a different effect. That's pretty cool. It's cool regardless. It's just, you know, an interesting thing to have. And they've got other people on board who are going to bring more of them to the table. So I think it's a great little platform. What a great idea. It's just fun and interesting and groovy and involves a lot more other companies, and everyone gets on board and has a lovely time. So yeah, cool. I like that one. The UDO Super Gemini. Great name. Very much a great name. Now this is interesting because I don't have all the specs to hand on this particular one, but I just want to give you my absolute first impression. With the Super 6, which seemed to be a fantastic synthesizer, you were always seemingly dragged into a conversation about binauralness and the FPGA nature of the oscillators. And for some reason, so every time I talk about the Super 6, you're always seeing it in a very technical place. You know, how are those oscillators working? Are they modelled? No, they're digitally recreated in something which is better than modelling or DSP. This is some other thing. And they go all sort of strange and binaural. Isn't it really important about how panable or binauralness they are? And you go, well, I don't know that I care. Does it make a nice sound? I never really gotten to the bottom of whether the Super 6 makes a nice sound or not. No, I've no idea. So in comes the Super Gemini, which appears to be two of these at least stuck on top of each other, and the immediate sense I get is that this is just a flipping synthesizer. It sounds gorgeous, big sounds, lovely sounds, evolving, interesting sounds. All of the controls are out on the front. You've got two layers of synthesis, both of which are represented very much like the CS80. And you can control them all at once, all together, making this wonderful synthesizer sound. So from my point of view, I want to look at this a lot deeper because I think it's quite interesting. This is a big, undoubtedly expensive, but gloriously sounding proper synthesizer, which doesn't seem to have the distraction of these other things going on. I think we can now step past the Super 6 and go to the Gemini and just go, this is gorgeous. Thank you very much. Sebsongs PolySEQ. This is a little gem of a module. I really like this. I have almost bought one a number of times from Thonk. It's available as a kit. I don't have any cash just at the minute, but that would be the plan because I think it's great. What is it? Well, it's a little sequencer, and I'm a fan of sequencers. I like having all sorts of sequencers just scattered around the place. But this one in particular has the ability to store sequences and then pump them out to 3 different outputs, either all 3 the same or 3 differently. So that means you could have this sequencer running 3 different oscillators, for instance. You could be running them as some kind of polyphonic thing, perhaps, or something which accompanies each other, or just individual things doing their own thing. Is it you can just have one module which is essentially controlling different things in your system, and then you can dial in and send it different sequences for changes, because we like changes. You know, in a set that I would do at an EMOM, it'd be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you'd be using one sequence round. So if you want to get beyond that 10 minutes of fiddling around a single sequence, you need a way to change to another one, to have something else come in, and this looks like a simple way to do it. I also quite like the way you get stuff in, as in you don't program it on itself. You plug in a CV gate keyboard and you type in, you step sequence in like you would on SH101 or on the ASQ1 from ALM Busy Circuits. You put it in that way. So you give it a bunch of notes and then store it and then play it out to stuff. And I quite like that, because it saves me having to have a keyboard there that's going to do that sort of sequencing. It lets me store the sequence from that in a little module which I can use and play with and dial in. I think that's an enormously clever idea. The Neuzeit Warp, which is a wavetable synthesizer, and what's interesting about it, I think, is that it's got that sort of strange waveform display at the top. It's not a screen, but it's a see-through representation of a wavetable, I suppose, and behind it is all these LEDs which you can move around. Again, are they mechanically moving? I don't know, I don't think so. But you can see exactly where you are on the XY plane of your wavetable because of this LED moving about. That's really interesting. And as apparently you're introducing more voices, you get more LEDs showing you exactly what's going on. So as you modulate and change that wavetable about, you can see that happening. And I'm a big appreciator of that. You can also draw your own wavetables by adding spectra, more spectra stuff, more harmonics and stuff coming in. You can create a wavetable by bringing those, adding harmonics and adding spectral things, I don't know, to a waveform, changes the waveform, there's your wavetable, off you go. So yeah, interesting. I didn't get a chance to have a look at it in any depth, but there's certainly a move to get more wavetable into Eurorack, and that looks like a very interesting way to do it. The other one was from Nanopolis, and it's called the Antigone. This is a 4-voice multi-timbral synthesizer, so you can actually pull full whole synthesizers out of it if you wanted to, and they all can run their own synthesizer engine. So this is again thinking of the Coral, the Oxy Instruments Coral, perhaps, because you've got super saws, FM, you've got additive synthesis, you've got sample playback, wavetables and plucks. Apparently you've got 16 megabytes of RAM, a whole 16 megabytes, to load samples and wavetables. Now it does make you kind of think a little bit of Platts. Is it a Platts? Is it Platts again? Everyone's using the Platts firmware these days. I wonder whether we're ever going to get past that. Can there be another one that somebody can use? So this might be their own thing, or it might be a reinterpretation of Platts. We don't know at this point. But you get all the usual things inside. Very familiar engines. You also get modulation, envelopes. It's an entire synthesizer. It has 6 lots of CV input and 4 gates. So there's your 4 voices, if you like, and this is very much geared towards analog CV gate playing, as in there's no MIDI, I don't think. So the idea is that you approach it very much in a Eurorack style, so you're probably going to be using it as 4 independent synthesizers, perhaps more than one big voice, unless you have a way of polyphonically getting into it. Oh, so the PolySEQ from before, maybe that with its 3 channels would go into here rather nicely. Maybe. FrapTools are kind of another one of those companies that are a little bit bewildering. Like, what does any of it mean? What are any of it about? Why are there no labels on any of their modules? You know, those sorts of questions. I think the idea is that they don't treat you as an idiot. They treat you as a flippin' professional sound engineer with a degree in Eurorackness behind you before you even start. But that's probably desperately unfair. What is it that we're talking about on this occasion? We're talking about the CUNSA. CUNSA. They call it sound seasoning. It is a multi-channel filter, I'm pretty sure. And it's all about providing the special sauce, the seasoning, the flavouring to all of your Eurorack, which I think is a really nice bit of imagery. So at its heart, it's a pingable quad filter. So four filter channels, which can be pinged, which presumably means they can also be used as oscillators. And all of that gets mixed through to stuff and saturated. So you've either got almost like a polyphonic VCO going through there, nice and sort of these wonderful sine waves which are then saturated and mixed through the outside, or you've got a whole load of stuff being filtered together and mixed and saturated. So they're kind of right. It could be the whole system, and your entire Eurorack could end up in this in one channel or another, which then does that final bit of filtering and shaping and gooiness, which kind of melds the whole thing together. The Kaona Skippy. I heard about this before Superbooth and was immediately taken with it, because I'm a sucker for an interesting display, and this is exactly what it's got. It's got this big porthole, this big eye on the front, which is essentially shows 4 circles inside themselves, which represents 4 channels of this 4-channel trigger sequencer. It's just a trigger sequencer, but you can dial in Euclidean rhythms, of course you can, and other patterns and bits and pieces, and you can see them all displayed brilliantly in this lovely display, and then it kicks those out. You can have them running all sorts of different things in all sorts of different ways, but I also quite like the fact that there was sort of effects or processors inside to mess with it, so you could accelerate, speed things up and slow things down the way things went round, and it was just alarmingly engaging the way that this display was working, the way it was all interfaced with a little joystick. I thought that was really neat, clever and quite exciting, and it looks fantastic in your rack, I think, which I like that. I like that sort of thing. Out of the minds of Knobula has come the Pianophonic. Now this is another polyphonic module, a bit like the Polycinematic, but this one's different. This one takes the idea of a piano. So a hammer, an acoustic piano. A hammer against a string, against 3 strings, which creates this sound. That is the thinking behind it. And then what they've done is kind of taken that modelling and allowed you to apply it to other sounds. So to start with, you've got a piano. Piano sounds great in Eurorack. What? Why would I need that? But hey, we like sounds. In fact, I think a lot of this, where this comes from, is because people playing in Eurorack and other things, it's a faff to go back to your computer or to have your laptop in order to have some other piano sounds, electric piano sounds, synth sounds, larger things that you don't necessarily have in hardware. And those can be great bedrocks or backgrounds too, or ways of hooking you into the sounds that are familiar around the other Eurorack kind of nonsense that's going on. So to have it in a little module, it can be enormously helpful. That's where the Polycinematic has really worked. That's where I think the Choral from Oxy is going to work. And this is a similar idea. But because it's a different approach, it gives you a different set of sounds. So what you get is you get this front end, this transient hammer idea, this mechanical noise almost that's at the front of every sound you can dial in. And then you've got these essentially three oscillators for those 3 strings, and they can be anything. They can be wavetables from all sorts of places. You can put in whatever wavetables you like to create very interesting sounds, but it'll always have this sense of a hammer action to it, which I think is really interesting. Why do that? Why not do that? But why do that? And that's curious, and yet really quite interesting. Do I want a piano? I don't know that I do, but I quite like exploring this idea of this sound, this attack, and what that could bring. But also having tinkly stuff in your Eurorack, that definitely has some potential. Does it have to be MIDI driven? Not necessarily. Can it be just one note at a time? Possibly. These things are still yet to be explored. Instruo were there with almost an entire tent to themselves, an entire bus to themselves, and an entire game to themselves, which is brilliant. They're a tour de force, I think, Instruo in Modular. They are such a presence there with the beauty of their all Instruo systems. And just the sort of the level of quality that they bring to Modular is quite outstanding. It's just, they're amazing stuff. Now, of course, there's no way I'm going to pronounce any of this correctly. I'm just going to blunder on through. But they had two modules, particularly, that were new. The first one is the ART, and the other one is a TARG. I'm sure it's personal. They do it just to annoy me, I imagine, as opposed to being true to their Scottish roots. No, that can't be it. It shouldn't be me that has to learn how to pronounce things. Good Lord, no, things should just be laid out. Anyway, what was interesting about this, the ART in particular, is that it's essentially a replacement for the TAG, which was their big ladder filter, which I got ages and ages ago. I think it's more or less the only Instruo module that I have, because it's beautiful, it's well priced, and it just sits in your rack and just oozes a certain level of quality. But it's also huge and obviously far too big. They need something a little bit more compact. And that module sadly is now discontinued, but the successor is this ARD. And it brings the gorgeousness of a Moog filter down into a much smaller place. It also built in a VCA. The other one had 3 inputs, had mixing for 3 signals, which was really very, very useful. This, I don't think has that, but it does have a VCA instead, which again helps with its compactness in a crowded case. It also has an envelope follower, a comparator gate. The Trager had a beautiful sense of self-oscillation. You could just get some lovely sounding sine waves out of that. It was a gorgeous thing, and this I imagine is going to be similar. I think the idea behind it is to stick in the idea of a low-pass gate within the filter, or to use a filter in that. So that's where the strike bit comes from. So you can make it a very organic, natural sounding sound going through that VCA that's integral part of the filter. The other module is the TAG, which is an analog random voltage generator with 6 digital algorithms. So a whole bunch of randomization within a single module. A couple of last minute additions to my list. One is the track 8 from Thingstone. I don't have all the details, but I was able to watch a quick video, and it's essentially an 8-track recorder in a little desktop unit. I'm immediately reminded of something like the Roland VS880. You know, those original digital recorders that you're recording to hard disk on that replaced the Porter Studio and were kind of the gap between Porter Studios and using your computer seriously as a DAW. You had these hardware recorders that filled that gap. You know, you sort of had mini disc 4 tracks, then you had these hard disc 8 tracks. There was Fostex ones, Roland ones. They were superb. And then we all went in computers and we realised we could have infinite tracks, infinite effects, infinite plugins, and we don't have a clue what to do with all this wide bandwidth that we have. And so we have something like the track 8. 8 tracks. Deal with it. Just 8 tracks. That's all you got. 8 tracks. And it's got this lovely screen which displays absolutely everything you're doing. So the idea is it goes back to that 4-track, 8-track mentality of having linear recording, but it builds in the fact that you can also edit and copy, paste, and do all those sorts of things you could do in a DAW, but in a hardware interface. So, you know, simply, not intensely, simply. But you can basically just record multi-track, just do stuff, just record stuff, turn it on, record stuff without having a faff around, creating a new project, going through your template, setting up this, that and the other of your plugins and your bits and pieces, getting a click track. No, just sit it down, keys, press record, off you go. I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's a worthwhile thing to have. The other last minute thing is from a Robot Dog Music, and it's a solo ribbon controller. It's intelligent ribbon controller. The guy was saying something along the lines of, yeah, we have ribbon controllers and it creates a voltage, but then when you let go, that voltage disappears and kind of craps out whatever it was that you were doing. So you're moving something, and then you release it and it just disappears. And so he was trying to solve that problem. I'm trying to think, is that a problem? Is that something that happens? I suppose it is. Evidently he's found it to be a problem, and he's designed this thing in order to solve that problem. So it always stays what it is. So when you take your finger off, it stays there. It can hold it, or it can put it back to its previous state, or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but his basic point was that he had a sequence running, he had this plugged into the filter, and he was able to suddenly change the filter with it without it changing anything too much, going back to where it was beforehand and adding to it, or adding notes to a sequence, or interrupting something and playing with it to allow you to play with it and then leave it back to where it was. So yeah, a ribbon controller, a little bit like the Gliss thing I was talking about earlier, but done in a 1U, so it's sideways, which is interesting. And it also looked really nice. It had a really great sort of futuristic retro flavour to it. So yeah, quite interesting, worth mentioning, I think, worth exploring a bit. There also has something called an improbable sequencer. I can't for the life of me remember what that was about. There seemed to be two of them. One was triggers, one was voltage. No, I can't remember, but there was definitely a button you pressed which regenerated a pattern, and there was something about the probability in that. A load of steps and things, a couple of knobs. Anyway, it looked interesting, worth looking up, I should think. And finally, Black Corporation were not at Superbooth, but they did have rather a big announcement, a big chunky announcement to make at the same time. Not always sure that's a good idea, but hey, this is where we are. And this is called the Expander Mark II. Now, the original Expander was an expander for the Deckard's Dream, which was a 1U thing that had a ring mod and a reverb and sort of stereo outputs on it, that kind of thing. A useful addition to the Deckard's Dream, which has no effects or anything built into it as it is. The Expander Mark II, completely different kettle of fish. It has a similar colour scheme. Otherwise, this is a unit all of its own. It's a massive effects processor with extraordinary analog and digital effects built in, and a modulation matrix to let you route the whole thing together in whatever way you choose. Whatever way you want to chain them, you can flipping chain them, and you've just got a field of sliders in order to create and craft your way through an amazing desktop collection of effects. It's going to cost an arm and a leg, but flipping heck, is this a good looking thing. So I think that'll do. I mean, that's taken me about 2 hours to film. Hopefully I've squeezed this down into under an hour, which probably seems unlikely. But there we go. That was a whole load of stuff from Superbooth. Very exciting Superbooth, a lot of great stuff. Sadly, I wasn't able to see it all. I'm going to try to work out how to go for the whole thing next year to really dig in and work it properly. I mean, you know, there's pros and cons of that. You can take a camera and you can work it and you can video everything, but it's hard work and you don't get to enjoy it as a festival, and that it is something there to be enjoyed. And the going for the day that I do absolutely I have an opportunity just to bask in the awesomeness of it, chat to some really nice people and have a fun time, you know. And do I really want to end up working it for the benefit for the greater benefit of synthesizers and humankind? I don't know, maybe. We'll see. But maybe next year I'll be bringing a whole load of my own stuff. I mean, I've now got 2 versions of my module out. Who knows what the next year is going to bring? We just don't know, do we? So that's exciting. But if you ever get a chance to go, do go. It's such a thing. Such a great time. That's a great place. Lots of lovely people. Lots of extraordinary gear. It's just a fantastic event. And thanks to everyone who makes that happen, because it must be an enormous amount of work. Because I know, having done my own Synth East, you know, which is nowhere near any of it. But hey, I appreciate a small bit of what it takes to put on an event like that. And they did a fantastic job. Fantastic job. And Berlin's an interesting place to explore as well. So don't forget to give that a go while you're there. So that'll do. Back to normal things next month, I imagine. Live stream this Sunday. Let's give that a go, shall we? That's whatever the date is. It's the end of May 28th, possibly. Why don't I find out? Yes, 28th. So it is. So let's do that. 8 o'clock here. We'll come and talk about all those sorts of things and all the things that I missed and other bits and pieces that we can think of talking about. Let's talk about that. That would be great. Otherwise, from me, I'm working currently on the Plankton Zaps. And I'm also working on the Surface Pro 9, doing my videos on that. And from there, I feel I want to cascade into a lot of reviews of modules that I haven't gotten around to. I just need to work through a whole bunch. Got a bunch of DIY to do as well, as ever, and all sorts of wonderful, interesting, fascinating things. I'm going to remaster an album onto tape up here. That's what I'm going to do. Going to do that soon, so that'll be fun. I'm going to talk about 1U. I think that's interesting. So lots of goodies to come. I hope you'll join me for most of it. And remember, you can always subscribe. You can join me on Patreon, where I've almost got 100 people again. that would be amazing if you came along to be the 100th. That'd be great. And I have great plans for this summer of awesome things that are going to happen to my poor old long-suffering patrons. So that's also exciting. So that's enough from me. I hope that's been useful. In the meantime, go make some tunes.